stewardship. One of the things that communities really find is that when people feel a part of the community, when they envision themselves inside of it and they envision how they do things that can leverage what the community is doing, it has a huge impact on entrepreneurship, on people getting ideas and carrying out those ideas within the downtown core or elsewhere in the community. And then finally, to celebrate local character, history, and identity. It's a way of leveraging all those things for what people do in the downtown core. So some seasonal events and offerings, we've categorized this into a number of kind of components or subgroups, and seasonal events and offerings are one. So Arts in the Park, one that you already have as a seasonal activity that's happening through the summer, really successful, but there are others that could be explored, that could be tested to see if they draw people at different times of the year, or folks who are not drawn by other activities that you've got. So ideas for skating, to use that lake. Remember there was the idea of grooming ice, creating ice on the edge on the shoreline of downtown. So, maybe speed skating or training on the ice. There's another one, broomball or hockey games that are happening downtown. Open skating on the lake, ice carving, snow sculptures, ice castles, bars, and mazes. A lot of these have to do with winter, obviously, because that's a time when it's the most difficult to draw people to a downtown core. Parades, scavenger hunts, movies in the park, cultural celebrations, farmers markets, makers markets, spring cleanup, holiday festivals around lights and caroling, trick-or-treating at Halloween, Easter egg hunt for the holiday that we just experienced. So all things that can happen seasonally that could draw people to the downtown core. So that's one category. Another is day-to-day touch points. And I think this is probably the one that might be the least robust in downtown today. So the ideas of sidewalk sales, which is an old idea that could be regenerated in new ways. Food trucks and food carts, small crowd of musicians and performers. So rather than the big events, the concerts in the park, it's more like having a couple of musicians in a small park or in a corner of the park. Things that are happening that create that little bit of vibrancy in one spot that people can come across on their visits to downtown. Food tastings, daily specials, business district coupons, Forest Lake themed coloring pages within either the newspaper or books that are coupon books, happy hours, trivia nights, lawn games, and sports days. All things that can happen more on a day-to-day basis as opposed to the larger events. And then curated installations is another category. And photographs, as many of you know, have become so important to identity and place. And so this idea of photo-worthy and Instagrammable photos and places within the downtown that are those kind of key shots for people. So framed views, wings on the wall, that kind of idea that you see in that image right there. Ideas like that are ways to incorporate photography and images into a downtown. So themed sculpture installations. Think Chicago's Cows on Parade. St. Paul has had installations like this as well, around the Peanuts characters. Many cities do this. And I think the key to them is that they are short-term, whatever short-term means. If it's 6 months, if it's a season, maybe it's 2 years, but it's something that revolves over time. So people have start to build a sense of confidence that when they come back to downtown next time, there's going to be something different. There's going to be something new for them to see. Historical interpretations, word walls that you see in the upper right. Revolving or temporary artworks, really similar to the installations. Storefront window displays, more on the retail side, and then the idea of murals that are happening. And murals can be in multiple forms. They can be put on a building literally in either paint or otherwise. but they can also be projected. And we talked about projection art at the last meeting. And that's another way that is really exploding the ways people think art. So all of these combined, built into this notion, I think the overall suggestion as part of this, and you'll have time to review this in more detail once you get the draft document. This is a way of getting it in front of you now so you have a chance to think about it. But to establish an annual activation budget and set fundraising goals. So one of the things that communities are beginning to do more of is to hire, and I'll use the word hire, even though they may or likely are not staff per se, but to hire a curator who thinks about the entire picture of downtown from an arts and performance standpoint and begins to curate all of these various types of activities in ways that they all begin to work together. And there are actually grants available through some arts organizations to make these kinds of things happen. And to have someone in charge of that overall picture can be a really transformative way of a community thinking about both performance. So that's the first suggestion, is to create that budget and to establish those fundraising goals, and then to establish an arts curator and form an activation committee to coordinate your partners and champions in the community around this topic. To continually test new activation endeavors, so it doesn't all have to happen at once. And there can be ideas that are rolled out every year that might be a little bit different than what was tried previous, and a way of testing both the idea as well as the community response to it. And then to develop success metrics and to track progress. All things that would be under the purview of a potential curator around this topic. And just going back to kind of the overall notion of activation, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when I was doing downtown plans, this was really not even contemplated as part of a downtown plan. But as we have learned more about ways people experience place, this concept and this category of activity, it's been shown, has become really important in the way people think about their communities, their downtowns, districts, whatever place they're living. So with that, I will stop and open it up for questions and conversation.
At this point, are you looking for feedback on just overall this activation along on the list, or are you looking for feedback on specific items or ideation? Or
I would say,
my
thought is that we use this meeting and the discussion on this topic more than anything as a way of introducing the idea, to get some of the ideas out there in front of you. And as much conversation as you want to have now, that I can take back and make modifications to some of the thought process that we're putting into this, great. But it's not, you don't need to make a decision. It's not a decision item for you this evening. It's more to get it introduced so you can see it. You're going to see much more detail around it when you see the draft plan in a couple of weeks. So this is
There's another area on here that I think you could add for activation. We've already decided between the kids' snowmobile races and the Rotary that next year we're going to combine our two events. Okay. February 18th. There's a speedboat races on the way that happen almost every summer. So some of those events, I mean, we really wanted the city to be a part of putting the snowmobile and plunge together this year and make it a winter festival. That didn't happen, but I think that there's potential for that sort of thing. Using the events and the activities that want to come here, through permits, either through the county or through
one in the winter and one in the summer. Cool.
Out of curiosity, the arts curator, is that somebody that would have a full-time job doing that, or is that something they do for multiple cities, same concept, or the one?
It certainly can be both or either, but a lot of times it's not a full-time gig. So it's something that you would contract with someone for a certain amount of time through the year, every week, for them to conduct this kind of work. And there are more and more kind of public arts curators that are out there in the universe who are working with communities to do this type of thing. So there is availability for folks who are in the arts world who are less on the art production side and more on the art curation side and public arts.
So did you go through the state arts board?
You certainly can track folks down that way, but actually it could be a call for similar to a call for artists to try and find someone. It's almost like putting out a request for proposal to the arts community. And the arts community is very tight, and so if they get a hold of something like this, they're going to distribute it to their networks, and communities are finding quite a lot of success in finding people who have this kind of expertise.
Could that same person do what my dream was of finding, promoting the arts, finding shared studio and gallery space? Could that one person handle the overseer of all this and coordinate it with the city and landlord, and says that it costs them too much?
It might be, but it depends on the person's body.
It just
Especially
seems
as
nice to have one person in charge of making it all work, making it all gel, knowing what our weaknesses are, what we want, what the artists in the community want, and being the overseer of the whole project. I want that person.
I don't blame you.
And the person, I would add to that, Jenny, but the person who can help make the right app for whether it is promotion or supporting action.
That was my
Artists at the
question.
park need a sound system, and some of those logistics, but to be the conduit to the city resources.
Right, and where the chamber could plug in, where Rotary could plug in, where the Lions could plug in, and coordinate.
Yep. And that is central to what that person is doing. Kind of that notion of curation, coordination with partners.
I want to be on that pairing.
Yeah, right.
Is Jamie's position parts, is that still a part-time position, or is that full-time? So that capacity for someone for that, this group, I wouldn't have that capacity or bandwidth to do some of this.
Maybe imagine a scenario where this person might report. I think we're looking for something that is beyond. Probably, I would think additional headcount. Especially if we're looking to partner that with some additional role.
So the kind of that position potentially come from EDA and this.
We'll have to look. We're getting a little into the weeds, and I don't want to speak out of turn from the what a staff recommendation might be, but if I do, just my initial reaction to that question. Maybe, and I would push a little bit on, this is where many times we've seen this in the community where the EDA is the genesis that can start something, or maybe the seed. Think of like the North, the circulator bus system, the tracks, thank you. Like that initially started as an EDA effort, as a pilot, and then we realized, gosh, this is a great community effort, but it's not really an EDA function. Maybe this type of a role where maybe the EDA pilots, and then maybe it starts to take on more of, it's beyond just economic development, but it is broader parks and programming and community, so I think there's a number of ways we could, that would fit. I think we've got a nice app where the EDA is kind of seeded an idea to get started. I
Yes.
also see it just, just connecting dots. We've had a lot of conversation at the EDA with potential of a partnership between the EDA and the Chamber of Commerce on the Convention and Business Bureau. And might that type of a role also have some, we're thinking about community events and community calendar. I can think of some crossover with the Convention and Business Bureau and some of what that, how that might play into it. So, that'd be another connection that we want to consider.
Yeah, I mean, just look at this. I mean, that last page, you certainly, maybe some EDA funding would be a seed, but this is really all about, I mean, it's much bigger than one part-time curator role. It's a bigger effort if you're gonna tackle this, and certainly it's gonna be in bite-sized pieces, but yeah, I mean, this is really cool. Thankfully, there's some stuff we're doing. Great.
Do you have communities off the top of your head that maybe, that you would see are doing this well, that we just might want to keep on radar of, oh, maybe model after, do you have some recommendations?
Red Wing is doing a piece of it. So they have a curator, it's more around events and kind of arts associated with events. But they have a part-time curation role. I don't know if it's funded totally through the city. The city contributes to the position or to the person for that. I was going to say Grand Marais, but I'm not sure that they still do. They did for a time have this position. St. Paul, locally, St. Paul is probably the leader in this category. They've had arts, public artists in residence. They call that role, that position for years. And probably more than any other place, they're the genesis of this idea of having an arts curator involved in community performance and community arts. Local. Any other thoughts or comments on this before we move into the next piece? All right, well, thanks for the conversation, and just know that you're going to see more detail around this topic once you get there. Okay, concept refinement. So there were a number of things that came out of the discussion that this group had at the last meeting, as well as things that are happening in the community in the way of redevelopment that lead us to want to take a deeper dive, more conceptual design work around aspects of downtown. And so one of the things is more, if you remember, one of the ideas was within the directives of the downtown plan is to create a district parking facility in the northwest quadrant of downtown. So essentially not on the lake side, but on the opposite side of Lake Street. And there were comments as part of that discussion that, well, I mean, it makes sense from a spatial standpoint, but it's not really where people want to arrive downtown. They'd be parking there, but they really want to get to the lakeside. So one of the things that we've been exploring in these concepts is what does it mean and how would it look to take a more direct parking expansion approach within the downtown core. And so far, that's only focused on the Lakeside Memorial Park block or quadrant of downtown. That's going to expand shortly as we get into the redevelopment coordination south of there. We'll talk about that a little bit more too. Another one is an alternative to the downtown boat launch. There was discussion at the last meeting about, all the challenges that are created around that boat launch and what would it mean. And I think it's worth having more discussion in this group, among this group, about what it would mean if that were relocated and where. We have not analyzed. There's been some analysis of that topic in the past, but all I can say at this point is relocated outside of the downtown core. What would that mean? And maybe there are ideas that you want to talk about where it would go or where it could go. But is that legitimate to even think about? So that's the next one. A third one is the best placement of the canoe and kayak launch, where we had it shown in the previous work, probably didn't work from a conflict with other boats standpoint, so we looked at a different spot there. Transient boat slips, a broader and more robust strategy around transient boats, or transient slips. And then public realm alignment with the Vanelli's block redevelopment. So as many of you know, there's a development being considered on the Vanelli's block for most all of that block. And the concepts that are laid out in front of you leave a donut hole right now for that development area. But we are currently working on ideas for how city activities and city facilities could interact with that development in a more potentially robust way. So you'll be seeing those at the next meeting. So with that, I'm going to walk through the concepts and just the ideas in them. Before I jump into it, since parking is such an important aspect of this, I just wanted to remind folks that we look at this kind of parking scenario strategy for the downtown area. And we look at three scenarios. The first one is with downtowns or with the city's current parking standards, parking requirements, how much parking is available downtown, and based on those standards, how long or short are you on parking? And that scenario one suggested that if you were to apply that standard of the current city requirements for parking to downtown and to the downtown core, you're about 450 stalls shy of what that standard would dictate or require. Scenario two looks at a reduced amount of parking per 1,000 square feet of retail or commercial space, as well as reduced parking per unit of residential. And it's a little bit what is more in line with what you will see in most communities with downtown cores, similar to downtown cores. So scenario two suggests that rather than 450 stalls, that you're shy about 220 stalls. So it's getting better. If you were to adopt or embrace that level of parking standard. And then scenario three is something that probably would not apply to Forest Lake for some time, but I thought it was helpful for you to see it, and that's if you happen to be within a transit-rich environment where there were lots of different options for how people get to a place, that standard drops substantially from what your current standards are, and you would actually have more parking in the downtown core than you actually by about 125 stalls. So that's what those three scenarios suggest or look at. And depending on where you are, whether you feel like the current standards are the direction that Forest Lake ought to go and ought to adhere to, then you might be looking at somewhere in the range of 400 to 500 additional stalls to feel like you are adequately parked downtown. If you think that other small communities or other communities with downtown cores are kind of what you want to target, maybe about 200 stalls, something like that. And if you want to build more transit, then maybe you want to spend money on that rather than more parking at all. So those are the three scenarios, and I thought it was worth going through those just to walk through. So we've explored, and this is really exploration more than anything at this point, but we've explored the ideas that were listed on that previous slide in two different, what we're calling concepts, but essentially they're a packaging of disparate ideas or ideas that hang together, but explore the different components of them within concepts. So I'm going to start with a couple of things. One is that a primary organizing feature is this notion of a downtown trail loop. So in yellow, you see this idea of using the Hardwood Creek Trail as a leg of that, and then coming off on Northwest 2nd, Southwest 1st, or Southeast 1st, in order to draw people over to the lake side of downtown and pull them along the lake and create that loop. And That's about a mile walking loop, circumventing downtown, getting people into the park, and also taking advantage of the regional trail system that you've got. So that's one kind of overarching component of organization within the concept. Parking. So we looked at, and we're exploring this notion of what kind of environment really is going to draw people to Lakeside Memorial Park and allow people who are in the park to feel like they're part of downtown. So we, in both of these concepts, we're exploring this idea of taking the notion of the loop, the downtown loop trail, and linking that with a parkway strategy or a parkway character that also draws people off of Lake Street and moves them through and along Lakeside Memorial Park and then back out to Lake Street. And to make that overall parkway experience where they would enter at first or at second and move their way through to allow that experience to feel like they're traveling along the parkway rather than through a series of parking lots. It's really tough to do within the space confines of what exists in those couple of quadrants of downtown, but we're beginning to explore that idea. So the notion would be that this parkway would have its own unique character. If you have ever traveled the Minneapolis Parkway system, you know that they use red aggregate on the pavement, they have special lighting, there are special furnishings and components of that parkway system that make it feel like it's a unique place within the city. So that would be a notion that could be applied to this concept of parkway, where this corridor has its own unique character as a way of drawing that route that pulls people down to the park and making it a unique experience from the rest of the streets or from a parking lot throughout the rest of the space. So that's one notion. I think in either of the concepts that are in your packet, we don't take it probably far enough. If you decide that it's something you want us to explore, so this is direction that I'm looking for tonight, whether this is something that has any merit that you want me to push further. I think what you see tonight is probably not taken far enough if it's something you want to explore. So we'll do that. Parking. So as I mentioned, the Vanelli's block, which is this block right here, is kind of under development right now, so we're not really showing anything. We're working, or we're coordinating with the developer that is proposing something on that block so that what is ultimately unrolled is something that works with their development in coordination with. But there's nothing in there, nothing that we are ready to show you yet. But off of the parkway, the idea is that if this is the primary destination, and we know it is, this is the primary destination within the downtown from a public space standpoint, how do we get parking rather than across Lake Street, where it was shown in the last diagram up here? How do we get it within this block? So we've explored a couple of different alternatives for ways of doing that. This concept looks at the idea of creating a parking deck as part of a redevelopment strategy within an area or a frontage along Lake Street where there are single-level older buildings that are probably primed for redevelopment at some point. It would mean attempting to assemble those properties, which is always a challenge, and creating a unified redevelopment that would put commercial redevelopment kind of around the perimeter, Lake Street, and maybe that is retail on the main level, housing above, but a fairly narrow band of redevelopment that would happen on Lake Street. And then embedding within that this notion of a parking deck that would be constructed into the hillside toward Lake Street, because there's a little bit of a grade change if you can picture that. And the lower deck of the parking would essentially be, at this point, a little bit below parkway grade. And the second deck would be slightly above parkway grade. So we know we have water table issues or challenges to deal with, so it can't go too deep, but there's some depth that can be created in order to create that parking deck and then get 2 levels of parking out of that. Really preliminary back of napkin kinds of counting or looking at the spatial configuration is that we could increase the parking within that quadrant by about 110 stalls with a 2-level depth. So if you're someone looking at the 450 additional parking stalls as the need, this only captures about 25% of that or so. But if you're looking at the 220, this gets you much farther down the road, so about half of the parking demand. And then I think in accompaniment to that, probably the strategy would be to attempt to get more public parking in this block. That's one of the things we're exploring as part of that concept, part of that redevelopment concept. So in both cases, both here, that you'll see in a while, and here, the idea would be to leverage redevelopment for additional public parking. A couple other ideas as part of this would be to couple the canoe kayak launch close to the beach. So there would be both a sand launch area for canoes and kayaks, as well as tie-ups and locks for kayaks that people are bringing to the shore. Tying up a kayak is challenging. I've done it, but it's challenging and can work. So there could be little stanchions kind of along that edge of the sand beach. Where kayaks could be generally locked. So that's one idea. Another would be an idea that you've seen before, and that's to embed the warming house and beach house into the current commercial building on that corner, and to occupy the corner of that building to allow that to happen, create a plaza around it, and then the connections to the beach or the skating opportunities beyond. If that weren't possible, in order to open up the view from the roundabout to the lake, the idea of creating or constructing a new beach house, kind of where the playground is located in that spot. It's not a great spot for a playground, in my opinion. It's a little bit hidden. It's kind of tucked back there. It'd be better to have that more front and center within the park. So if you wanted to explore that possibility of a beach house there, maybe relocate the playground in a more prominent location that's more centralized in the park. So that was another idea. Another is to look at performance space in a portion of the park that is currently the boat launch. So this idea of relocating the boat launch somewhere else, I'll admit this is a little bit of kicking the can because I don't have the somewhere else in mind right now. You did an analysis of what a somewhere else could be, how many years ago?
Well, like 2005.
2005. So you explored some other possibilities. That's out there still, but I haven't done any analysis around that. But the notion of creating a more dedicated performance space within the park and maybe a stage or a performance venue that would accommodate both the performers and the audience and the spot of the park that is currently occupied by the boat launch. This one also explores this notion of what we're calling a paseo, but the idea of creating a really broad pedestrian way adjacent to this redevelopment, all the way from Lake Street to the lakefront. And again, over a portion of that property that is currently boat launch. And then at the end of that paseo, to construct a new transient boat facility That would be an extension of that Paseo boardwalk to the community and provide for 15 or so transient slips that will allow people to come off the lake, tie up their boat temporarily for a couple hours, have lunch, drink, dinner, what have you, and then go back out on the lake. And I think there are, you just have one kind of primary dock right now that is your transient dock. Maybe you can get, how many, Gary? 3, 4 boats?
Oh, no, you could eat,
Okay, and people are comfortable parking that way. So this would allow for more formalized boat slips, lateral slips, and bigger docks, and could get more in that range of 15, 16 boats. A little higher quantity. What else can I show you? Oh, at both of these crossings, one of the things we heard from some folks is the real trepidation or the concern that any crossing, any pedestrian crossing of Highway 61 or Lake Street is going to be a dangerous crossing. And that's really real. We've got a lot of traffic and it moves through downtown. So any crossing that we're thinking of, that you are thinking of making really primary, really an important crossing, we've got 2 shown in here. One is at first, and one is at second here. Both would conceivably use this concept of a hawk signal. And hawk signals are pedestrian activated flashing lights, essentially. So it allows pedestrians to walk up to the crosswalk, hit a button, flashing lights start, and communities, drivers within communities typically when flashing lights are flashing, they need to stop. And they're now used all over the country. They're really prevalent and common in high pedestrian traffic areas. So that would be the notion of creating these hawk signals at both of those crossings of Lake Street. I'm looking at my notes. What have I missed?
Is there a reason that you would relocate the Veterans Memorial and the Veterans Walk?
Yeah. So the concern that I've got, and again, it's just my perception, is that a memorial needs verticality in order to really feel like people have arrived to a place. And putting it in that spot creates one more visual barrier between kind of the core of downtown and home. And so in both of these concepts, I explored different ideas of ways of incorporating a memorial in a spot that isn't your primary view shed, the lake from downtown. One remaining kind of opening from Lake Street to.
Well, first, just a clarification. I'm used to thinking of decks above the pavement, decks, plus button decks. Is that great market?
It would be half below
That's fine.
and half below.
So you'll meander up and down and cover that as you see that.
It could be handled in different ways. It could be a speed ramp to one level, and then a speed ramp down to the next, or vice versa.
Obviously, the fear is the large structure sitting between eastern side businesses and the lake. So the more you take that away and the higher you go, the more you get the building, it just retreats away. We're talking so it's hard to transition in there. I understand all the rationales and why this is that very much. I just find it very difficult. It makes the parking lot now is a parking lot.
Yes.
Grade level. You see nothing past it. I think tomorrow night we're at the Parks Lakes Trail with Memorial Veterans Memorial. And I think if you'll come to that and see what we're doing there, you'll see that it's not an object of the way. It's a neat object you see, and it's not massive. There would be a sculpture, something I've seen, something new, and the rest of it would be very well on it. So I don't think we're denying the fact that we are viewscape, whatever you call it, is developed.
And how, as you're thinking about it, how is the parking deck with the retail on the first levels and built up more obtrusive than Park Place? Yeah, that big 3-story thing at the corner of Broadway and Lake. No, I didn't say that. I didn't say, okay, I said that big thing.
Anyway, it sits there, and from its point of view, it sees the lake clean. I'm after that. The rest of downtown is back again and see the lake cleanly on a big project. So there's what I think the objection is for me. You're saying how is one worse than the other? Well, that's housing, commercial, it's not a parking ramp. It's where people live and play and work. And they want into the lake view. And I think the rest of downtown plan to be lake view as well, as long as we stay polarized. Now, I'm not really overwhelmed by the fact that you can make town, you can stay really like half-story kind of thing. That is much less objectionable. The concept number 2, you're right there in front of the park place. And I think if anything kills the image of the park, it's those options sitting in the park, not stopping the first impressions of the park.
I get it.
Last thing I'd say is that the park needs to get bigger. You know,
Say again, Mark?
the park needs to get bigger. Any way, shape, or form, we can make that park bigger. But that's when we will watch things like that. All in favor. And I think if you look at the code for the gap house from this time forward, I think you should think about national parks and how they handle this sort of thing. It would be a nutrition to the amount of space that you have to hire if you're starting to set up the individual rooms with investment in it, with the common share, sink washing outside of it. You could sneak into the plaza in the northwest corner and make that happen. Find report going in for public access. That you could do.
Yeah.
And then that would go away and immensely improves downtown's parking image. And so I'm in favor of those things dramatically. I think the boathouse or the bath house is much smaller than some capacity. And I think that the parking ramp needs to stay.
So just a note about elevations, but again, really preliminarily, but what we're thinking, that we think there's enough grade just based on the restoration. Lake Street is up about 8 feet, between 6 and 8 feet from here to the back sides of the buildings in that spot. I think that's fairly accurate. So you can almost, if you think of a parking deck, just think of it flat for a moment, that you excavate out right up to Lake Street, and half of this deck is tucked into the grade, or actually maybe even a little bit better, it gets down maybe 8 to 10 feet by the time you get to Lake Street. And then the second deck is essentially at Lake Street elevation or a little bit higher. So the second deck of this parking structure is almost at the retail floor elevation, or really close to it. Ideally, be at the retail floor.
So it's, from a Lake Street perspective, barely less than a 10-foot rise for sure to the top of that parking deck.
Directly level.
It's directly level.
Yeah, and the downside and the point that Mark is making is something I'm also concerned about. Even a 5-foot wall at this point is kind of a bummer. To have a parking deck with, a wall that is this high right off of the parkway strategy or parkway concept, you'd rather not do that. And whether you can mitigate it by getting down a little bit lower to the ground, maybe that's possible. Once you do some more detailed evaluation and engineering on it. But you want to get that as low as possible so you don't end up with a situation that has been brought up where the parking deck is this elevated thing that blocks your view of the park or ruins the experience of the residential units within that.
I think Park Place has proven that go down and keep your first level of whatever that function is at the Lake Street level. So we can enter those buildings from that side. And so we fought the water issue, we fought the water issues with the dam pool, slab. We never really did that water issue.
Really?
And so I think, not even public during construction, so I think we're having the ability to build a parking level there. I want to ensure that the street frontage, that's commercial, has the opportunity to be 2 stories as well.
You would hope that that'd be
that, and you'll have this good frontage coming out of it. I think the first level can be grade level with the street. I think you can get down another 5 feet, and as you raise up to 61 for 5 feet, whatever feet there, you 10 something, you already got some great idea. And you could keep coming back under this parking lot that's out in the street. You keep coming down. At some point, down stop, find yourself there. And yeah, I still think you have lots to maneuver with there. The only thing I still fear is driving from one side, getting down and coming back up and going through.
Yep.
I don't really understand that.
Yeah, I agree.
Not to reopen this whole thing again to a conversation, but it seems to me like the 400-pound gorilla in this whole deal is we'd like more parking away from the lake, more parking on the other side, and then get the traffic, the people, pedestrians getting from parking down to the downtown. We'd love to see downtown versus parking lots. And if we looked at it last time, you had a 3-story parking ramp on the other side, but then you had to put a pedestrian bridge across to get there. Is there a challenge with this town right here on a roundabout? I say that because there is no roundabouts in a downtown anywhere in Washington Square or Washington County. There's none in White Bear, there's none in North St. Paul, there's none in Stillwater, there's none in Wyoming or North Grand. Having that roundabout there creates that groove through there that doesn't allow your pedestrians to walk across. I moved here and I lived here in 1975, and there were stoplights. The stoplight stops it, people push the button and they walk across. And I know that Washington County would be against that, the DOT would fight that, but I also heard when they first put that roundabout in, there were 7 of them on the concept all the way out to Broadway. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to flow that traffic as fast as they can. If we slow that traffic down, we put stopping lights in there, then we can park over by Gertens. They'd probably even love to have that, and there's a lot more parking over there without so much parking downtown in that area. It makes the town more beautiful. You're going to have more retail, and you're going to have that parking can go out 2 or 3 blocks. I don't think anybody's opposed to that if they can figure out how to get there without getting killed crossing 61. I think 61 is a tough part right now. That roundabout, without that, they have normal stoplights. Because see, we had a liquor store down in White Bear, right on 4th Street. We were about 2 blocks away, not even 2, about a block away. I would have never done that if they had a roundabout there. Because there would be no traffic coming from Cup and Cone and all of the other restaurants coming from either side.
No walking traffic, is that what you mean?
There is now, what they do on 4th Street is beautiful, you go down to White Bear. Because there's restaurants on both sides, you go back and forth, they spread the parking. When they have like Market Fest and the parade and the Market Fest or all the other little things, they park out in the town, and they'll park blocks away to the west side, and then they'll walk across 61. 61 is just a killer for us. We can't, that's why you're trying to get us into either end without getting anybody through the middle part of town. That's just my thoughts on that. I think we keep trying to figure out how to get more parking for retail for people downtown, and yet we can't figure out how to get across 61. And I get it, I know DOT would.
Well, no, and I would have some real challenges with that. I have watched people almost get killed on 61 in White Bear, trying to get from the area of Cup and Combe and Pizzo over to Market Fest, and it's very difficult. The problem with 61 and Broadway is that we have so many folks doing recreational stuff, and it is a transit corridor for a lot of semis and farm equipment, and we would be backed up forever trying to let a semi go that was going northbound on Lake, try to make the left to go westbound on Broadway. Because unless you take down a bunch of those buildings, there's not enough width to make the corner unless somebody who is eastbound is willing to back up. Quite frankly, in terms of safety, in terms of moving people in town, the roundabout has been a good thing. Now, unfortunately, we're dealing with humans who are, whether they're on Interstate 35 or they're on 61 or they're on North Shore Trail, are trying to go too fast. And I don't think that there's I do some work with trying to do some traffic calming and slowing folks down in another city. And there's nothing that we can do except speed humps every quarter mile that will really slow people down.
Yes, you can definitely back it up, but that's the concept. When you do that, people find alternate routes. Right now, everybody coming from White Bear to Hugo to Forest Lake that's going to Wyoming and North Branch, they blow down 61. Because it's easier than going from 61 out to 35, which is already packed, and then you fight that all the way down, and then you come back into here. So everybody hops onto 61. 61 is it's a great road, I realize that, and it works out perfect, but it's killing this little town right here. If you put stoplights in there and you back people up, they will find an alternate route. And it's also gonna change when 97 picks up all of this traffic that they have over on 35. That's gonna get slugged, that's gonna have a lot of traffic, and that's gonna force more people are gonna wanna try and stay on 61 going back and forth. This isn't gonna get less, it's not gonna be any less traffic, and you can't cross right now on our roundabout. You can't.
I do it on a regular basis. I do it.
It's dangerous. And people aren't really watching, there's no stoplight there, there's nothing, it just says a pedestrian, you don't have one of those jaywalks over there that.
The hawk.
A hawk, yeah, if you had a hawk on the roundabout, something like that could stop that, but that's the same thing as going to do the stoplight. It's just my thoughts on it.
So, and the previous work that you all saw was this notion of creating the parking structure on the west side of Lake Street, where this big P in the darker purple is located. And initially, we had it suggested not going up to Northwest Second, just kind of being interior to the block. And this group suggested, well, if you're going to show that bubble, show the bubble going all the way to Second, so there's a connection to a public way. And then we had the idea of crossing Lake Street with some kind of an elevated walkway. And I think what we heard from this group, and we feel it ourselves, there are just so many challenges and logistical problems with trying to do an elevated skyway or walkway across the and there are lots of them. And so what I hear you saying is that if Broadway had a different crossing style, had a different signalization, then it would be safer for pedestrians. So my question, I guess, would be if the concept is to not try and mess with something on the lake side of Lake Street, but instead continue to try and drive toward this idea of parking on the west side, if you were able to work as part of a redevelopment in getting structured parking on that block connected to Second. Yeah, right here. So get it connected up to this street corridor. Rely on then the new hawk signalization or hawk crossing at Second and Lake to get folks who are parking in this ramp across and it's not as direct. But maybe it provides that safe route, apart from having to do something different with the roundabout, that safe route for pedestrians to get across.
Is it too much to have that box system move the block as well? Plus let's say the roundabout.
It would be either or. I don't think, well, Ryan, I shouldn't speak for Ryan.
I would just admit that obviously is going to take you through the review process, and I don't think both locations, so if you have both locations, you can actually crosswalk constantly push more traffic would do at that point. So that would be the difficulty to get that approved without traffic.
So as I hear the conversation, as I think about, some of the challenges of the aesthetics of putting the parking kind of between the lake and Lake Street, is there instead an opportunity for a redevelopment effort of that same type of a parking structure to be situated on the north side? So I think about there's so the block that is just to the east of Lighthouse Lofts, where there's been a nutrition shop, we had a store that was doing illegal massage. I mean, there's a couple of buildings there that maybe are ripe for redevelopment. I know Title Smart's done some updates to that building that may or may not make that a good candidate, but on that north side, especially if we are thinking of relocating the boat launch, is there an opportunity for that redevelopment to happen on the north side? And then do you kind of have best of both worlds where you don't have to cross 61, but you're also on the north side of Intro?
Well, if you're over there, you're still, you're usually not for lighthouse lots.
No, you'll be north of Lighthouse Lofts.
Potentially north of Lighthouse Lofts, or are you in a spot where you could do low enough that you are, you're not a 4-story parking structure, maybe it's similar of height of 1 story, half below, 1 story above, half above, and maybe you're not too much taller than the existing buildings. I don't know if that location.
On the other side of Lake from Rooms. On the other side of Lake Street from Rooms.
So you're actually right across from House Lots.
Here's the.
Use this block right here, is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, there's a lot of residences there right now.
You've got about 8, 9 properties to deal with there. So it doesn't matter. It would be kind of cool because I think that idea could work if you go back on the south side and compel the developer to respond with a certain amount of public parking over there. Get a number up over there. And you got your hawk system going across where you already kind of show some other parking over there. That ramp isn't so heavily pressured. And that distribution is so important downtown. Anyway, they can move around a bit, even being across 61, just in case getting across 61. Spatially, like you said, that's probably the most logical place to put it. Least disruption to business, easiest construction. All of that is a true story over there. It's crossing. It's crossing.
There's already a hawk signal down there just shy of 2nd. I use it all the time.
Yes, there is.
An old version of it. Yep.
Right in front of Dan's Tech and Jeff, right? Kitty corner
Yeah, it's
from.
just shy of the block.
So another thing that I think it's always important for us to remember is that we're doing a downtown plan
Yes.
that more than anything is going to set you up to be prepared for opportunities. And if, unless there is an idea that's on paper that just is a really bad idea, we should take it off. Then we should take it off if it's a bad idea. If there are multiple approaches to the same solution, same problem and set of solutions, let's just leave multiple ideas on the table. So that whichever one pops from a private redevelopment standpoint, you've got it in your mind that, hey, we want to leverage that for something that we want to accomplish. And I think the same is true when you'll see as we are able to show the concepts for the south side of the Vanelli's block, that there's going to be a concept there that gets at some portion of your parking situation too. And I think that's the point that Mark is bringing up, where it doesn't have to be all solved in the same spot. It's recognizing that you have a need, someone else is doing something that you can leverage. Let's take advantage of it. That's it.
I appreciate the comment about, the potential redevelopment at the Nellis block. There could be some opportunity for public parking. I'm just nervous of us. I just think we should not be putting too many eggs in that basket, because I suspect that plan is going to come in with a fair amount of housing need, and with that comes also a fairly significant need for parking, and we were already at a parking deficit. So I think that might help some, but I suspect that a good plan will also have some other parking available. It's probably a AMP situation, because we're going to probably need to beg for our own steel parking every place we can possibly get it.
So just to, maybe for the public to know that the EDA did voted for additional funding for that little part of the study, so that's additional to this.
Yeah, good call.
So,
Good call.
And this is.
and what do you think there'll be some movement on that as a concept to see what that looks
We'll show that at the meeting of the next time I'm back.
So this is just a continuation of the schematic concept realm. The deep dive that Mr. Evans is pushing is yet to come.
Well, yes, we're taking a deep dive into that block. We're also going to be exploring everything that you see in these diagrams at a greater scale. So right now, we've only drawn them at 100 scale. This is 100 scale. We're going to take that down to 40 scale, so we have a much clearer picture of dimensions and concepts. So the same concept.
Before we move on to concept two, I had a note that you had asked at the very beginning of discussion of concept one, if you had a question to us on whether we wanted you to put more definition into the plan and more specificity around the walking path on the southern side of the park, which is essentially the connection from the trail to the park. Do we have feedback for Bruce on the level of specificity or definition that we want of that? Do we want more? I think maybe you would add more graphical features of what that might look like. Am I characterizing your ask of us?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we
What is it, a walkway for bikes and pedestrians that how much green space do we really need? I decided to really have some. And so I'd like to know that, the developer wants to like to know that as well, because that will start to set the setbacks.
There's really no good way for folks that are using that trail and families that are using that trail to get off the trail and in the downtown.
Oh, the regional trail.
Yeah,
Yeah,
The-
well, I'm not arguing.
Harvard Creek. I
I'm
mean,
not arguing the loop, but
we have been missing a really big opportunity for families, for the number of folks that bike that trail has just blown my mind over the years. And there's no reason that we should let folks still think that the best place to get on and off the trail is if you go next to the subway, when we really could have an opportunity to have folks take advantage of Forest Lake, the amenities and the things that they could do in our community on and off the trail.
We have more opportunity here than people. I'm not a big biker, so I just shake my head. Like, really, this is what you have to offer?
Yes,
Oh my
ma'am. Well, and think of what even Scandia has done with the way that they have worked to develop their trails and the things that they're doing to now, we've got their trails and some of the redevelopment and the historical stuff that they're doing in the community. Their amphitheater and some of those things. Taking advantage of what families want to do to be together and be outside and to do stuff in Minnesota outside when we can.
Shame on you.
So I think for a couple of meetings now, we've had consensus that was an important feature. And it sounds like maybe feedback is whatever you can provide in the next layer of definition to make that come to life as much as possible. I think helps to be.
We're intending to do that.
I think there's few parts of this plan where we're going to tell you, I think we've all got a crystal clear picture, we don't need more definition. I think anywhere you can provide some additional definition, I think it just helps kind of bring consensus together and make sure we're all picturing the same thing. Is that an okay summarization feedback?
So I think all the components essentially are the same, a little bit different orientation, but I do want to point out in concept two, the main difference really is how the parking deck is configured through this space. And this particular one does not rely on redevelopment. So it would excavate down as deep as were realistic and feasible given the water table. And it would then deck over the top of that subterranean layer with a second deck that would be essentially over all of what is parking today and adjacent to the park. The downside, which I think is significant, is that there's really no way to go deep enough to not have a wall of some height that is that parking garage. And it might only be 5 or 6 feet, but when you're trying to create an experience of a parkway and then a park, even to have that amount of wall with cars parked up on top of it, it's just kind of a bummer. It's not ideal. But it allows you to construct additional parking in the downtown core without having to rely on redevelopment or a developer doing something in partnership with you. So that's why we.
But that gives you opportunities with the landscaping that you've got there along the parkway to soften the wall. Use that wall as the mural, the projection.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, there are things you can do with it.
Right.
Could the vendors and food trucks be along that wall?
The space is really tight. So they could, we are not showing any parking on the parkway in that spot. But it could happen. The vendors could be there. I don't know if we want vendors across the parkway, but they could be on the park side of that parkway in parallel parking spots.
I do think the parking lot offers a whole lot relative to events and food trucks and stuff like that. Even events can expand out into that parking lot. Some of them also have the base of the beachfront parking. When you take the parking ramp element to that and tuck it up to 61, you have an opportunity for a partnership. You're not making everything about the ramp much more convenient. It used to be that you just work with big businesses, business were included, you could also some grants for the parking ramp, fuel waters, and example. I just think you got a partnership you have in creating the retail or the commercial by having the ramp with the parking level there. And you're just going to hide on both sides of it. It just seems like a natural place to have a partnership all over the times.
You know, I like several concepts in both concept 1 and concept 2. However, as you said earlier when we first started this conversation, both concept 1 and concept 2 are then about the
Yep, that's right.
And I just think we have to be realists on this, to be honest with you. To relocate that launch someplace on Forest Lake, I know that there are investment. To have sufficient area for the monopoles to come in out. This launch right now is not available on the lake unless there is some major capital expenditure by properties. So I think we have to be, these are great concepts. I really like some of the options in it, but I think we also have to, you know, 40-pound gorilla, 800-pound gorilla is the boat launch. And until we have some idea, the city can shut the launch down 100% if they want it. It's a private launch. It's not a full launch. I cannot stop us from shutting it down. You'll have thousands of people complaining. You know, if you relocate it, let's be honest, who's going to want that amount of cars and boat trailers by their house anywhere roughly? Expand the launch on Third Lake or expand the launch over on Second Lake. Not possible, there's not enough land expanding one of those launches. Yeah. Yeah, put it over put a little boats over there. Yeah, something, whatever. I'm all for that. So I mean, I really like some of these concepts here, I really do. But the 800-pound gorilla is still boat launch. So, I mean, do we spend a lot of time thinking about this? And I don't know, Dan, the study from 2005, what was brought up there.
So the study from 2005 had it going at the end of the road just to the north of, right there, more buying the property to the north of there for a turnaround. That option was explored back in 2005, and the possibility was back then. So they put it where it is. But to your point on the boat launch, the grant that we got from the DNR is a 20-year grant. It comes up due in like 2 years from now. There is a possibility that if the stars align and momentum behind it, we could theoretically, based on the grant agreement that we have, close that launch. The which way we kind of try to relocate that somewhere else on the lake. There are other spots in the lake where the probably go down there, but are they big enough to still want? Probably not. But the current grant as it exists, we have a grant agreement through 2025. But if you don't either cancel it or make adjustments to it, automatically renews or kicks it out 5 more years after that. So it is a good time to start having this conversation of if we're going to close it, we can start taking those steps now. If we wait for 2025, we're too late, we're stuck into 25.
So the concept was to come down Second Street, to launch it down there.
Yeah, I believe it had purchasing like the 3 properties on the lake, the parking lot down there and a turnaround. There was another time that it had it going down without parking, but at the time, it was really cost prohibitive given the fact that we were doing at that point, redesign of downtown, and just stuff in the downtown. And we got grant funding from the ER to help support that.
The amount of boats is about double.
Jerry, when I first came to town, all I heard was, got too many people from outside coming out to the lake, and they're messing up our lake, and they're the ones that are bringing in the invasives.
I'm not in favor of any boat launches, unfortunately, don't get me wrong.
Jerry's team close them all, to be clear.
Close them all, but let's be realists too here.
But you think the uses that great, you mentioned,
No,
And like
it's,
the
it's
launch in the metro, public launch in the metro.
in 2020. I probably, one day I don't have it, but in 2020, there were 3,000 boats that were expected at that launch. And that was only 50% staffed.
we have a rationale, saying, our lake is better off without that, and if we could get that department plus there, there's enough of a rationale there that we give up those thousands, 3,000, whether it's voters on the lake or season. How would we do it? Over e-commerce. I don't see how commerce. I can see the damage to the lake.
I would say most people live on the lake for not any boat launches. Launch one was the better used launch on horse. And it is, launches are what bring the new species into it. Okay. That being said, I would hope that the redevelopment downtown, the concept is that we're trying to capture and allow businesses downtown to be a mission business for the transit boats that are coming in and for the people that are launching rowboats instead of the day. So we should take some type of business away from downtown business. I don't know.
But even the yearboat club people don't buy things in at Mallard's or at, you know, at the stores here. They bring all their stuff in, and when I'm in Arts in the Park staff and the Master Gardener table, they've got all their coolers and stuff when they're back into the lake. They're not buying anything in town. They're,
Question is, if it was convenient for them, would they?
Fireside is very convenient for them.
I mean, we should, it's a typical story if we actually have control of the contract. And if we could do something, that's just gather all.
Well, I think you would find, I don't know, Blake is pretty active on the lake. I don't think there's real on the lake would be objectionable to shutting a launch down, but public standpoint, because there are a lot of people who aren't live on the lake. We have those that live off the lake, but use that launch for the whole different residents of Bullshit.
I think that having something, and I would disagree, and Ron Vanelli would disagree with you, Susan, too, as far as the boat club and bringing people to town, buying products. Now, you look at Whitesetta, in Stillwater, they have all these slips that they're spending their nights there. It's a little different thing, but they're using the businesses in town. I think, I wouldn't be opposed to maybe moving that to some degree, but to say to shut it down and not allow that, it just brings people to town, brings people from Blaine or Lionel. It's one of the biggest lakes in the area. They're gonna come fishing, they're gonna do that, and maybe they don't stop at Mallard's or something, but they might hit a sandwich place on the way out of town or the way into town, they're gonna have to find something, gas, whatever it is. It just breaks people.
So can you leave the launch where it is at the front of the bus?
So I'm gonna throw out my sense of what we saw in analysis of just what I observed within kind of the way downtown functions. I think the boat launch is a really big wrench in your downtown. And it doesn't speak to the commercial activity that's generated by the boat launch, but I think that commercial activity would still be there if your boat launch weren't in the core of downtown. It's just my sense of what I see. And I think the boat launch is inhibiting you as a commercial district. I think it's inhibiting redevelopment of the remainder of that block. And if you could find a way to relocate it to a spot that still has some adjacency, but not in the core, you're going to see a lot change, I believe, downtown. And a lot of investment happen that you are not experiencing now because it's
I mean, in a former life, I've probably been to almost every access in Minnesota, and you'll see a lot in urban areas where there's an access point, but no parking adjacent to it. They just basically put a ramp down, and they direct it either across the street or all that boat trailer traffic has to go, and you walk back. It's walking adjacent, but there's a lot of them in Wilmington, for example, where you may have to walk 2 blocks to get back to your boat, and those launches are so used. So there's a possibility of moving the launch maybe Second Street, but not putting the parking there, putting the parking across 61 so can still use it. So you're kind of blending the both options there. But I have seen that work in other communities as sort of a way to maximize the use of the land.
Have you ever looked at that lot on the south side of the trail, that the one behind the little chocolate shop? Not chocolate shop anymore.
Yeah, just a former Daniela's now one.
Yeah, because that one was for sale about 4 or 5 years ago. At some time selling, so I think it's 650. But that's a good sized lot. I was
Do
surprised.
you mean the home behind it, adjacent to the townhouse?
I mean, versus buying 9 houses over here, to remove relocation of docks to there, or to the boat launch. You get a bigger parcel like that than a single parcel. You know, maybe something to entertain that as an option.
Yeah, if we were to, so much of this plan is having to have a plan in place and then to be opportunistic on when opportunities come forward for redevelopment, and that's gonna happen at all different times. If we were interested in exploring options, alternatives for the boat launch, given that timeline of when that was due, when do we need to start that process? Is there still a window for consideration, or is this a 5-year process and we need to start 10 years?
No, I think we're well within the window now. I would say probably would, and again, I'd have to confirm when, I think it's July of 2025 is when it's renewed. So if we start conversation with DNR now and say, hey, we're looking at exploring options to move it, what's the protocol for us to do that? How do we take care of this? We're well within that window, so if we wait 18 months from now, it's going to be a lot tighter and harder.
okay. I think I should kind of close the discussion about these for this week. So based on what I'm hearing around parking, this notion of parking structure or consolidated parking deck, is to create within the plan, the draft of the plan that you'll see on the 9th, at least 2, maybe 3, but at least 2 different flaps of concepts for parking structures. One would be concept 1, this one, where the deck is associated with redevelopment and it kind of is tucked into the slope on Lake Street. And the other would be the one that you saw earlier. Whether or not it includes some kind of a bridge over 61, maybe maybe we could see clear to really relying on Second Northwest as the crossing point for that parking infrastructure. And then the plan conceivably would have both of those concepts in it. So you're ready to, jump on an opportunity if one comes up. I'm hearing less enthusiasm for this idea, although maybe it's mixed. Maybe I should have all three of those within the plan. And I'll draw them up that way for the next meeting so that you got them. And then you can make some decisions. We're going to have, we're going to get a draft document to Dan and Pat on the 2nd of May, for about a week before our meeting on the 9th, so that they have a chance to take a look at it. We'll make edits before we distribute on the 9th. I'll be back on the 9th. We'll be going through implementation recommendations, and I'm not going to review the draft document, but you're going to get it, probably digitally, but you'll get a copy of it. And that'll be kind of the opening then of the last phase or the last stage of community engagement, where we ask folks to weigh in on the draft plan and critique what they see, especially in the implementation strategies, but throughout the plan.
Will that include also the deeper dive into the values?
Yep. So we'll review that on the 9th as well.
Project, is that set in stone with the city? Is that just, it is in concept level with the developer, the city does not, as of the last I knew, received an official submission of a project application. We know that they are just in concept development and have had some working sessions at the staff level, some working sessions, but nothing is done over planning commission. Nothing is formally submitted, so all of very much in concept. Other questions, thoughts on next steps?
Just one point. So on both these concepts, show the very large marina or dock system, right? There was suggestions made a couple meetings ago to engage in the DNR to see what that's allowed and how big that. I think that has to happen. I think that needs to happen. You guys see what the reality is. I like the idea, but it just is reality.
I think recognizing sometimes the DNR timeline can be lengthy, even if by the time we're wanting to have this next round of discussions, even if that isn't actually vetted out with the DNR, some indication of next steps and suggestions of what does that process look like, I think would be helpful to everybody. Just to say, have a sense that that might be a bit of a discussion point. When it comes to that goal club too, we have same control on how we make it. To some degree, yes. So yes, I'll take a stab at this and then somebody else fill it out with a color commentary. So yes, and then one of the limiters to that is kind of the density that's allowed by the DNR of any dock system application. So we have some direct control, but then we also have covering factors. And also, I would, I've said this before in a meeting, I would encourage us as we think about, it's easy for this group to get kind of into the weeds of, is it your boat club or is it somebody else? I would just look at that as dock space in general from a plan perspective and just know that at times that might be city provided dock, it might be a dock club. Let's not think of so much of the logistics of those transactions, but more of just how that space is used. And I think like as a plan that has, there's a desire for expanded space beyond what we have today.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. And I will entertain a motion to adjourn. We adjourn. Motion and second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, and we're adjourned.